The number one economy in the world was India. Between India and China, they shared 68% of the global GDP. You can't even imagine. Thank you. 17th century, we sort of slipped back. China edged forward. 18th century onwards, both countries forgot where they were. By the time we got our independence, we were nowhere on the chart. And last year, 1/3 the global poverty burden lives in India. What a shame. A country which was 1700 years led the world's GDP. I'm using GDP as a reference point because that's the only thing that was measured. What I'm going to speak now is only hypothesized. We didn't have the tools then to measure it. We had economic tools to project. And you and I think I'm sure your generation too, at least my generation, we grew up on a fodder in history class, where my history teacher told me we are a great country, but they never told me what was great. They just told we are great. They kept on telling we are great. Like Himmler said, you keep repeating a lie, you will start believing in it. I did believe that India was a great country. But there were other lies told to me also. My history teacher also told me we were so great, but we became so poor only because of the British. What a great excuse we gave ourselves. They kept telling me, oh, the colonization destroyed us. Colonization. And I would ask my teacher, I still remember asking my teacher, what did they take from India? And the only two things my history teacher could tell me was Peacock Throne and Kohinoor Diamond. As though this can make us poor. I think what TAPME has built is 100 Peacock Thrones or 1,000 Kohinoor Diamonds. But we don't value them. And this is what I believed. I thought, oh my God, they took away something so valuable. Then we must bring it back. We'll become rich again. I forgot about it. I went into medicine. I actually believed that somebody made us impoverished. I wish I had stayed in that zone. But later on, I realized I got to get deep into it. Maybe I thought, let me understand. I started studying development economics. And you'll be surprised, my friends. If India was the cause of Britain's wealth, it's just plain logic that 1947 onwards, because they let go of India, this crown in their jewel, Britain should have become poorer, right? Because if I'm having my bank called India feeding into my GDP and I let go India, it's common sense, I have to become poorer. But you'll all be surprised, post 1947 is when Britain actually became richer. Letting go of India made them richer, not kept us poorer. Then what is it? What really happened? Then why did we become poor? Because evidence talks differently. Till 1800, India never had a known recorded famine in its history. In our civilizational history, we never had famine. But the first recorded famine in India, the Great Bengal famine, was when the British ruled us. So what went wrong? A lot of things went wrong, my friends. We need to appreciate this. If we were great till 1700, 1800, in the last 200, 300 years, what went wrong? Was it the Kohinoor Diamond and the Peacock Throne? Was something else taken away from us? And I believe our socio-cultural DNA was dismantled. And the socio-cultural DNA I want to stress upon is a human and social capital that existed in India. The GDP was not the jewel in our crown. Our economic growth was a consequence of an extraordinary human and social capital that this nation had created. That is the India we need to bring back. Today, unfortunately, our policy planners, our politicians, our economists think that economic growth will have social consequences. It has never worked anywhere in the world. It's actually the other way. What we need is a new India which invests on its human and social capital, and that will produce the economic consequences that we all want. An economic consequence which will mean every child will be in school. There will be no malnourished child in this great country of ours. It will go back to the India of the past. How do we do it? What is this capital that we talk about? Remember what got dismantled. Very subtle things happened, which we never know. Nobody taught us in history. 1730, 20% of the share of global trade came from India, this great country of ours. India knew trade. India knew ships even before the Westerners thought that ships will float on water. Vivekananda stood in London and said, you nation of brutes, he called them. They were actually brutes. We taught them civilization. History also taught us, there's a question in my history book, the standard question, all of you would have learnt it. Who discovered India? Vasco da Gama. What nonsense. Vasco da Gama never discovered India. Vasco da Gama was brought to India. I didn't say this. Vasco da Gama says this. His journals, written in Spanish, he records in his journal, and these are the exact statements, or I'm not saying the exact words, but to that effect. I was always under the belief that I had built the greatest ship on earth, the largest ship on earth, but I was still afraid as a sailor, and that is why I always sailed along the coastline. I had always watched the coast, because I was afraid to venture out deep into the ocean. I had to be close to the coast. And as I turned round the Cape of Good Hope in Africa, I saw an armada of ships coming towards Africa, towards the shore. From deep in the ocean, they were coming towards the coast. Ships that were 10 times the size of mine, and tens of them. I was so impressed, I also set anchor and spoke to the captain of those ships, the armada of ships. And he told me he's come to trade. He brings cardamom, spices, pepper, and he comes from a great country called Bharat. And I asked him, can you take me with you? And he led me back to Kerala's coast. And that is how, my friends, he came to India. He didn't discover India. We give him the credit for one of the captains who brought him to India. But what you need to be proud of is that we had the technology to have a ship 10 times the ship that he thought was the largest in the world. We had the trade qualities. We had no MBA schools, but we had great traders who made sure that 20% of the world trade came from India in 1730. That's when we could start measuring. And by 1810, in just a span of 80 years, India's share of global trade came down to 2%. Something happened. It's not as though our products suddenly disappeared. Something happened which destroyed India's capacity to trade. Trade was a socio-cultural DNA I'm talking. I am not talking just of the Puranas, the Vedas, all that is great. Product of a highly refined human mind. You cannot even conceive the power of the Bhagavad Gita. To me, even if it is not the words of God, I don't care. The words of a man as creative as that deserves to be God. And that is the Indian mind. A country which never invaded another country despite having the power to do so. That is greatness. If you're weak in saying, I can't take away my neighbor's daughter, that is not great. When I have the absolute capacity to take her in, and I still don't do it, out of respect for her, that is greatness. That is the India we lived in. That was a DNA just dismantled. By the time we got our independence, 0.5% of the share of global trade of India. What a shame. Then our educational system was dismantled, our technological systems were dismantled, our trade was dismantled, and that is why we lost the power of the Industrial Revolution. Neither did we have the intelligence to create it ourselves because it was dismantled. The structures were dismantled. The social institutions supporting the social capital of this country were successfully dismantled. And they never gave us the technology. A country which could put up the Ashoka pillar thousands of years ago, which knew metallurgy, don't you think we could have built better steam engines? We could have, but our scientists' brains were gone. We can't even conceive the power that we had. Just dismantling our educational institutions and processes took away a generation of thinkers in this great country of ours. Thankfully, that was the generation which threw up a Mahatma Gandhi. We have in management, some of you might read, called the crucible theory. I think that century was the crucible of our times. It threw up a Vivekananda, Rabindranath Tagore, a Mahatma Gandhi, extraordinary people. All the leaders you can mention all belong to that century of time, please remember. Today you have nobody. If you want to build a resurgent India, we have to recreate that history, not that poverty. We have to recreate that leadership, and that is what you people can do today. That is the resurgence that you need to bring back to India by understanding that change doesn't have to be about change at all. That's a mistake we all do. Change has to begin with understanding what to preserve. Change is not about change at all. It's about knowing what to preserve. And we need to learn to preserve the socio-cultural extraordinary wisdom, and tradition is not dirty. Tradition can be empirically verified, and that's what we need to do. And that is the human capital that we need. A generation of young people capable of creating this world. Because this is the country which told the world Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. It is not just a slogan. We believed in it. We believed that the world is our place and we got to take care of it. And that is why I think India is a country to be in. I keep telling my American students, you should take my class not because I want you to pamper my ego, but you got to prepare yourself because the next jobs may be in India 10 years later. It is no exaggeration, my friends. If we can create that human capital, this is where they need to be. I keep saying, for a long time I thought 1/3 the global poverty burden was a problem. Now I think it is God's design. Which other country will have the courage to take care of 1/3 the world's poor except ours? But we got to take care of them. So before clapping, remember, we have a responsibility now. God has given us an extraordinary responsibility to create that social capital which can address that problem, to create that human capital which will have the courage to say, not just me, but others. And that is why I told these two young friends I met in your lab today, an extraordinary lab that you have, that learn to make money. It's very important. But what is more important is how to spend it wisely on others. That is what is social capital. This country had it, knew it, and today we're talking about, even before the world discovered CSR, the Tatas are practicing it a century ago. Today we use a nice term for it, that's all. And remember, we are the only country in the world which has a law for CSR. It's a shame and an advantage. The shame is because we have to enforce it. The greatness is because our politicians actually did something good by thinking about it. No other country has even thought about it. So how do you build this human capital? Is it just colleges, schools, institutions? More and more Manipals? All that is important. That's part of building the human capital, because that's what gives you cognitive intelligence. But our colleges unfortunately stop there. They only give you cognitive intelligence. That is not what the Indian educational systems gave. The Indian systems of education, the Gurukulas, gave you much more than cognitive intelligence. It gave you something which is so powerful. Today's research validates it. I am not saying it. Today, a lot of my work has been in the world of neuroscience and leadership. A lot of my study and teaching is how does the brain influence leadership? Today we have technology. I can actually run an fMRI, not an MRI, on your brains after giving you a simulated experiment and find out who amongst you is capable of being a leader. Who amongst you can be the CEO of my company if I have one. It is not the psychometric evaluations and the tests that I need to give. I can do a simple brain scan and tell you whether you're good enough to be a man to be hired by me. And this is not rocket science. This is actually happening. There's a lot of research in UC San Diego, in Case Western, in Harvard, which is actually looking at all this. How is the brain connected? And you'll be surprised. One thing that's standing up is, for some strange reason, there's a huge correlation between the development of a prefrontal cortex and people who are extraordinarily successful in life. People are great leaders, people are great CEOs, people are great wise people. For some reason, the one common thing is all of them have a well-developed prefrontal cortex. Now, how do you build your prefrontal cortex? How do you build human capital to develop your prefrontal? So our university should not teach you just finance management. They should also teach you how to develop this. And you'll be surprised. This is a question a lot of people at Harvard had. And they had a very simple way of looking at it. They said, most students who come to our university are all tops, 10 on 10 CGPAs, the perfect essays. Now I keep joking, every student who wants to get into Harvard will have two kinds of essays to write. Why do they want to get in there? And what they'll do after they graduate. And 90% have common answers. I want to get in there because you're the best in the world, you're number one university, I want to be there, I deserve to be there and all that. And what will you do after get back? I want to serve the world, I want to change this humanity and all that. Both of them never do either of that. But all essays will be this. In fact, you get books today, the 100 best essays which can get you selected to Harvard. And students buy it, Amazon, Flipkart, everything has got it. And you can keep writing it. Except don't plagiarize, keep writing the same theme, you will get into it. The biggest joke I crack is if they can give me admission, they can give any of you admission. I became an activist there also. I created a lot of problems for them after I got there. But the point I'm trying to make is they decided the best get into our institutions. So let's see what happens after they graduate. We are creating the world's greatest human capital. Successfully for 400 years we have been the top university, at least number one for many, many years in this 400. So let's see how many of our students we can correlate cognitive abilities to success in life. You will be shocked, my young friends. They can only establish a correlation of 4% and lesser. The rest of it, in the words of Bill Gates, he said, "Thank God I dropped out of Harvard." And he became what he became. Just imagine the poor man had completed his education there. He would have done his master's, he would have done his PhD, and then he would have been a professor in some small university. But today he's created millions for the world. I don't know if he's made the world a better place through Microsoft, but at least he's trying to make the world a better place through his foundation. He's creating social capital in his own way. And that happened because he had the ability to create the human capital and the economic capital. But the point I'm trying to make is, if the university started getting worried. What do we teach in our schools to make successful people? How do we create this human capital? How does it happen? Where will it get created? And some universities started going deep into it. Case Western was one of them. They started researching and finding out. They said, well, let's understand what should be taught in our schools to make them great human beings, to get them great human capital for the world. And you'll all be surprised. They identified 5 factors which Indian Gurukulas were doing it for centuries. And today we say, if Harvard publishes a paper, we'll stand up and listen. And we'll say, oh my God, we have to read it. Harvard Business School case bank, our students should read. But what a sad story we have to say. We have the world's greatest wisdom sitting in our country, and we don't even look at it. We look at it outside. You young people should change all that. You should become the case bank of India. Every one of you should become a success story which the West will learn to emulate. And that is the human capital you'll all have to become. What are those 5 qualities? The same 5 qualities Vivekananda spoke about. Vivekananda spoke of them as Vedantic qualities. He said practical Vedanta is learning all that. He said education is not just information running riot in your brains, he said. Then he said, if that were the case, your libraries will be the greatest source of information. Your TAPME library has got more to offer than all your students who graduated till now. But we don't go there. They don't make a difference. It is you who make a difference. And what are the 5 qualities that this world identified? It's research. They went around and looked at successful people around the world in every human sector: science, technology, academia, social sector, political leadership. And they looked at them and said, what is it that's common amongst all these people who are successful? And if we can teach that to our children, that is the world we can build. That's the human capital we need to create. And you know what they found out? The first quality they discovered was compassion. We don't give a PhD in compassion. There is no classroom which teaches compassion. We teach people to be selfish. We say, first rank, second rank, third rank, fourth rank, the better. You come home with your marks card as a child. I can tell you, most of you sitting here would have had this experience. You come home with the marks card in your hand as a proud young child saying, I got 4th rank in my class, and your mother wants to know who got the first rank. This is the India we created in 65 years, last 300 years. This is never the India that was there. It was always we. It was never I. It is not too late. 10, 12 years ago, when all these channels were not there, we only had Doordarshan. I was away from my forest. In the forest, I never had electricity itself. Forget Doordarshan. I was in Bangalore. Suddenly, my friend's house, they were watching something on Doordarshan. Those days, you had no choice. You had to watch what was shown on Doordarshan. That is how it operated. It was Nukkad, it was Nukkad. It was cricket match, it was cricket match. They were showing the national games being played at Hyderabad. National games for specially abled children. And this actually happened. I saw it. Young little 8, 10, 12-year-olds, paraplegic, hemiplegics, on wheelchairs, on a crutch, were running a race. The race is about to begin. The race began. Children started, I can't call it running. They were running in their own way. One child on a crutch, which was leading the race, slipped and fell. Other children continued the race. The child coming second now started coming first. Suddenly looked around, he saw the child was still on the ground. He held his hands like this, stopped everybody from running, and went back, helped that boy up, got every child to hold hands, and together they completed the race. This is an Indian child, 8-year-old Indian child. Unfortunately, some college will screw his mind up and take away that extraordinary human capital that we had. This is you. Everybody can come first. That is the human capital we need to create. There is no need to compete. There is so much this world can give us. There's so much that we can give the world. If at all you want to compete, compete to see who can give the most of yourself to the world, not competing to see who can take the most of what is there for me to take. That is the competition you got to build. Those are the human citizens you got to build. And the first quality they discovered is compassion. Compassion for society, for others. Vivekananda said, he alone lives who lives for others. The rest are more dead than alive. Be alive, my young friends. India needs your life. Be alive for a cause. Give yourself the meaning to life. Viktor Frankl says, a life without meaning is no life at all. Give yourselves meaning. A meaning of building a great resurgent India. That is a meaning, not meaning of getting a job at 15 lakhs, 20 lakhs. I teach at various business schools. So I won't name the